The year is 1902, and a crowd has gathered in the town square to witness the most unusual display of automotive prowess. A single cylinder Cadillac is about to be driven up the stairs of the local courthouse. The one lung car revs up and bounces and tugs up the stairs till finally it reaches the top. The crowd goes wild at the impressive feat, but the Cadillac isn't done yet. The driver now puts the car into reverse and, in a controlled descent, backs down the stairs he just drove up. The triumphant 22-year-old driver has just proven the merits of the first model Cadillac, but his name isn't the one on the car. He goes by the name Brush. It would take another 5 years before a car would bear the name of Alanson Brush. But before that day would come, Mr. Brush would have a distinguished career as a head engineer of the Cadillac, developing the first engine the legendary firm would use, and the same one powering the Cadillac up the stairs to that courthouse. Later, he would become a founding member of the Oakland Motor Car Company, another car brand that would fall under Durant's buying spree at General Motors. Eventually, Oakland would be absorbed by Pontiac. They called it a runabout because it would run about a block and then quit, was a common joke of runabouts in the day. But the reality for this car was far different. In 1907, the world would be graced by perhaps the single greatest one-cylinder powered car ever to exist for consumption in America. The Brush Runabout, a tiny thing weighing around 900 pounds, making 10 horsepower. The heart of the runabout would come from a one-cylinder engine of Alanson Brush's own design. Perhaps never getting over the idea of a quality one-cylinder car from his Cadillac days, the Brush Company would never manufacture a multi-cylinder car for its entire existence. The car was bizarre but brilliant, sophisticated but simple, perfect and yet ridiculous. The axles were made of hardwood, such as maple or oak, reducing cost and weight. The engine spun in the opposite direction from most cars of the era. The Oakland would as well, in theory making it safer for a right-handed individual to crank the engine over. The Brush would lack an electric starter, like many cars of the era. The Brush would also have coil springs on all four wheels, but not springs of compression, but tension springs. Much like the Model T, the Brush would carry a 2-speed planetary transmission, making it easier to drive. All of these features had a real purpose. One might ask if Alanson Brush had made a more conventional 4-cylinder car with all of these features, maybe minus the wooden axles, if the Brush could have been a huge success. But really, why did this car exist? The car existed for a few reasons. The biggest, of course, being that this car was cheap. Really cheap. In 1911, an advertisement was listing the car at $485, and the more affordable stripped-down Liberty Brush at $350, while a Model T Torpedo was listed at $590 and a touring car at $690. The inherent simplicity of the single-cylinder design resulted in less parts and seemingly less labor to manufacture it. Brush would also never manufacture a closed car. All of their production would be of the runabout type. Another reason that a car like this would have been successful was that there was still a prejudice among the car-buying world against multi-cylinder cars. The logic for this inversion being that when a car broke down, it would be 4 times as much to repair a 4-cylinder engine than a single cylinder, and maintenance was easier as well. 1 spark plug versus 2, 2 valves to grind versus 8. You get the picture. Why did this car fail? The car failed for as many reasons as why it existed. Even though the Brush was very inexpensive, it also made the car cheap, similar to how a Nissan Versa today is viewed as a very cheap car in lieu of more sophisticated and advanced options. For a little more money, a 4-cylinder car like a Model T with a roof and windshield, many Brush cars had neither, could be had. The car was also slow. A top speed of 35 miles an hour was claimed. Maybe it could go that fast, but I'm doubtful. The Ford Model T wasn't the price champion at this point, but it arguably had much better value. But this isn't what really killed this car. What really killed this car for good was the United States Motor Company, the brief failed attempt to consolidate the decentralized industry. In 1909, Benjamin Briscoe, an early financier at Buick and Maxwell concerns, saw a problem that many would come to realize later, that there were too many cars competing for too few sales. At the time United States Motor Company was formed, there were hundreds of companies at various price points trying to sell cars. Brush, along with prize firms like Stoddard Dayton, Thomas, Maxwell, and a dozen or so other brands, would join. and it was a disaster. The company was essentially a dozen independent companies struggling for capital and not synergizing at all. Many of these firms were already near death, and their poor performance would bring the company down even further. The only profitable brand was apparently Maxwell. Even Brush, with healthy sales, could not bring a profit at such low prices. To make a long story short, the United States Motor Company would die a few years later in 1913, taking all of the companies involved along with it, only sparing Maxwell, which would become the genesis of Chrysler in 1924. That was it for the Brush. The single-cylinder market was already in terminal decline, and the Model T would begin to define the low-price segment in the following years. According to American Automobiles of the Brass era, the number of single-cylinder cars peaked in 1907 and by 1915 had dropped to just one model. But luckily for Brush, his story wasn't over. Brush would never place his name on a car again, but would run his own consulting firm in the industry till he died in March of 1952.